of something. We've just come through another Autism Awareness Month, another cycle of posts on reels, on webinars, on parent guide, on expert threads. Another month where autism is everywhere and somehow still not here. Because if you're listening for it, really listening, you'll notice something. Gestalt processing barely exists in that space. Or if, and when it does, it shows up distorted, folding into something else, marketed, simplified, translated to a shape that can be sold. And I want to talk about that, not as takedown, not as cynicism, but as someone standing inside this, as an autistic person, as a Gestalt processor, as someone who has spent years reading both the research and the room, and noticing something very simple. I do not see myself in what is being sold. So, a lot of the content you're seeing right now, especially if you are the parent of a young child, comes from people who care. That matters. I want to say that clearly. Many of them are autistic themselves. Many are parents of autistic children. Many are trying to share what worked. But there is a quiet fault line that rarely gets named. They are not Gestalt processors. Or if they're autistic, they're not operating from a Gestalt language architecture. And that matters more than the field is willing to admit, because what happens then is subtle. They describe a child. They describe a struggle. They describe an intervention that helped. And what you're given as a parent, as a teacher, as someone trying to help, is not a mirror. It's a window. You're looking through someone else's processing system and being told that this is what your child is. And if your child is organizing language, time, and meaning differently, that window becomes a distortion. Not because anyone's lying, but because the architecture underneath the claim doesn't match the architecture of the child. And this is where the pattern tightens. Because the story often follows a familiar arc. There was struggle, there was confusion, there was something that wasn't working. Then there was an intervention. Executive functioning coach, language restructuring, compliance reframed as skill building, a system. And then relief, progress, hope. And that story gets told as something close to a miracle. Not explicitly, usually, but structurally. This worked, this unlocked something. This is what your child needs. And if you're a parent, especially if you've been told your child's behind, stuck, not progressing, that story lands hard. Because you're not just hearing information, you're hearing possibility, and that's exactly where the extraction begins. Now, there is a lot of money in this space. That's not an accusation, that's a material condition. When a concept becomes broadly useful, diagnostically, educationally, therapeutically, it also becomes billable. Executive functioning is one of those concepts. It can explain almost anything. It can be measured in multiple ways. It can be trained, coached, scaffolded, monitored. And most importantly, it can be sold as the missing piece. And what happens over time when that claim expands? A study becomes a slide becomes training, a training becomes service, a service becomes a promise. And by the time it reaches you, it no longer sounds like a bounded idea. It sounds universal. It sounds like the answer. But the question that often never gets asked is, does this evidence actually belong to your child? Let me slow that down, because that's the heart of it. Much of what is cited in support of these interventions was not built around autistic Gestalt processors. Sometimes the children in the study are not autistic at all. Sometimes autism is included but flattened into a single category. Sometimes language is treated as linear, decontextualized, fast. And the task themselves, this matters, often assumes a very specific way of processing. Quick response, step-by-step comprehension, immediate retrieval, suppression of associative thinking. If your child doesn't organize language that way, then the task is not neutral. It's asking your child to perform in a system that doesn't recognize how they build meaning. So, when your child fails that task, what is actually being measured? Is it deficit or is it mismatch? This is what I mean by category error. Evidence from one kind of mind being applied to another as if they are the same. And once the error is in place, everything downstream starts to look convincing. So this is where I want to offer something practical. Not as program, not as intervention, a way of reading, a decoder ring. When someone is selling you support, ask, who was actually studied? Do those children look like mine? Really? What is being measured? Is this about compliance, speed, visible behavior, or about access, meaning, regulation? What kind of language does this assume? Does it allow latency for scripting, for building meaning in chunks, in echoes, in returns, recursivity? And then, what counts as success? A quieter child, a faster child, or a child who is less overwhelmed, more understood? Or maybe that's the most important one. Maybe this is. What happens if my child doesn't respond to this? Are they seen as communicating something or as needing more intervention? Because the answer will tell you whether the model can actually see your child or only reshape them. So I am not saying support cannot help. Some support does help. Some practitioners are doing extraordinary, careful, relational work. But support is not the same as proof. And right now, those two things are being blurred again and again in ways that cost families money and cost children recognition. Gestalt processing is not an edge case. Most autistic people are Gestalt processors. And many people outside of autism are too. But the field still centers an analytic model of language and then treats everything else as deviation. So what you are seeing online, what gets amplified, monetized, circulated, is often not a mirror of your child. It's a translation into a system that already decided what counts. So if this feels disorienting, good. Not because confusion is the goal, but because certainty has been oversold. You didn't need to reject support, but you are allowed to ask harder questions. You are allowed to notice when something doesn't fit. You are allowed to trust what your child's way of building meaning is not a problem waiting to be fixed, but a system waiting to be understood. So this isn't a map. It's a way of reading the maps you've been given and deciding carefully which ones were ever drawn for your child in the first place. So to that end, this video introduces a very long piece full of reference and scripts that can help you as a parent, as a caregiver, as a teacher, whomever is involved in this, how to decipher, how to borrow my PhD hat when you look at claims, when you scroll through the memes to the end where it says, oh, and we're referencing this study, that study, the other study, how to actually dig through those. And so in that paper, which I've linked to on this page, comes out in a few minutes anyways, but in that piece that I wrote, I named 3 pieces that are out there in circulation amongst those practitioners that make their living on this confusion, right? They engage in this logical fallacy of appealing to an authority, the authority of these 3 research papers, none of which meaningfully include autistic people who happen to be Gestalt processors. So I walk you through it, and hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully it helps you make not this decision or that decision, but the right decision for your family and for your child. And so with that, I wish you good day.